Good day, everybody. Welcome back to Down the Donut Hole podcast on Freaky Friday. And today we have all things red.
And maybe some other colors too.
It's not all freaky, though.
No, it isn't. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple news things.
I'll bet you do.
Apparently, in the interest of efficiency and cost cutting, the United States has cut off international funding for initiatives that combated child labor laws and the promotion of using little kids in factories as cheap labor. I know down here in Florida, the legislation, I believe, is passed that now allows children to work late at night and to work during the day. In some cases, they're saying that if you're homeschooled, you can work during the day too. So I don't like where that's going.
So that's good news for bosses who are named Scrooge.
Yeah, I suppose. And it's good for anybody that needs cheap labor and, they don't want to deal with undocumented immigrants and that sort of thing. So I see where that's going. I used to think we were a champion of, protection for the weak and the young and all of that. I think maybe this is a transitionary period. Maybe there's new ways of approaching all of this that I don't understand. And so I'm remaining open to learn more. And I believe that's the only way you can negotiate these times that are unsettling. But keep your mind open, watch. You can have your opinions, but again, don't get overboard with it. Be clear in your thoughts. Be clear in what you're saying. Remain open to hear other things, but that doesn't mean abandon what you think. And so, or be afraid. It's just in how you deliver your message. And, as long as you're open to listening. And I think that's an important thing. Another little bit of news that I saw, we've covered all the tariff things. We've talked a lot about that. We've talked a lot about job cuts for federal employees. We've talked about the judges and the fact that it seems like the guardrails between the branches of our government are being eroded day by day. Those are all worrisome trends. The leader of that American base in Greenland last week wrote a letter to all of the people who work and live on that base. And that includes people not just from the United States, Canadians, Danes, other countries who have some of their troops hosted there. And so she wrote a letter and said that the visit by Vice President Vance and his wife was unsettling. She had heard a lot of complaints, a lot of requests for clarification. What did that mean, et cetera, et cetera. And so she wrote a letter saying, that it is what it is, but she assured everybody that she appreciates her role in being there for Space Force and that. Anyway, since then, she was removed from that office. So I don't know whether the letter preceded that or was a follow-up to her removal, but I thought it was really classy. I really did. And I know that this has to be difficult times for people in Panama, for people in Greenland, for people in the Gaza Strips, wondering, what are we doing? What are we about? Because I know as an American, the uncertainty of it all is deeply disturbing. In terms of Panama, I understand that yesterday we talked about Panama being declared reiterating their sovereignty and re-recognizing their sovereignty. And my opinion is so we negotiate with Panama and no one else. I understand that there are big companies who are trying to purchase a lot of the ports, a lot of the infrastructure for the ports, which is aging up. Now it appears that it needs a lot of attention and a lot of rebuilding and rethought with a more modern sensibility. And there's a big corporation that's looking to buy a lot of the existing ports there. The deal is on the table, and it was virtually done. China stepped up and halted the deal. So where do we go from here? My question is, who are the people that are buying these? Are they private companies that that will profit from all of this and from our endeavors to get it? Who are these people? So I have a lot of research to do before I really follow up on this subject. And so again, there's an awful lot of change happening awfully, awfully fast. And there's people that are just by nature change adverse. They prefer to coast along. They prefer the status quo. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, except for one little problem. Change happens. And if it's happening in torrents like it is these days, it can be very, very worrisome. So I think that the solution to that is to pivot today. We've had a full week of nervous news. Some days we never got to do much that was other than that, because it's just a matter of sort of clarifying a middle-of-the-road viewpoint on things that isn't deeply embedded in camps. And, it's just another perspective that I think in the aggregate helps people, because I think most people feel like they need to keep a middle-of-the-road stance on things because there's just so much anxiety on both sides.
Yeah,
And
that's true. It's hard to. Well, I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, middle of the road as a general concept. To me, I think it means just do your research, which may end you up on one side or the other, at least a little bit skewed one side or the other.
That's okay.
Right, but I mean, to make it sort of dogmatic, to be always in the middle, maybe not practical.
Or always on either side. Mm-hmm. Now, see, I think that's how we got where we are. I think these have become teams. And with the same team loyalty that we enjoy for a game, we have to remember, those games are big business. But our team loyalty, our wearing of the brands and all of that stuff, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're not, turning over cars in the parking lot or...
But they do, see.
That's part of the fun, Dave. Come on.
No, that's not fun. When they do...
Forgive me, I have an awful problem with the pollen today.
I know. It's been wicked lately. But we did sort of tongue-in-cheek have commented that it doesn't matter whether a team wins or loses. They end up like destroying their own town that they're from.
Or climbing up on stuff. Do you know they have to grease the light poles in cities where contests, well, not even where the contests are happening, where there's, one of the teams that are playing, the fans get so out of control. They like to climb up the light poles. And I think it was in Philadelphia, a young man lost his life. Just in that sheer exuberance of partying and celebrating a victory.
And
drunk. I know in Gainesville, after the March Madness finale the other day, Monday.
That's right. Yeah, they won.
A young man fell. I don't believe he was killed, but, still, ouch. So, anyway.
That's crazy. I mean, it's the polarization of all that is what I think is a problem.
I think these have become very polarizing times all the way around. It's enjoyable to a very high degree with the sports. I enjoy watching sports, and I get it. Although I will say, if you see a spectacular play, I'm a football fan. If you see a spectacular catch or something like that, or a throw or something that you just, as a fan, you just sit there and you say, man, that was beautiful. That was just beautiful. I don't care which team does that. Well, I do, but at the same time, you can enjoy the absolute virtuosity of the ability to play a game. And in politics, if we become so rigid that we can't every now and then say, you know what, that's not all wrong. And if there was more of a willingness to negotiate, to come up with something that felt better for the side that is not in the majority, I think that we would advance more quickly. And I think the possibility of making America great again lies in that formula, because it's always that. It always comes down to the ability of a leader to inspire people, to make people feel connected and have a common goal in mind, and to approve of, for the most part, ways of achieving a goal that's going to bring good for everyone. Because we have to live in this. You know, we can't live in these little separate camps. We have to find a way to become one people in this country again. And you know, that's got to be the goal. That's got to be everybody's goal, because as soon as we are one people, we are great again. We have all the potential. It's all there, but it's all this infighting. You know, you can watch an ant colony and everybody's doing their thing. I know it's not out of free will, that it's, you know, just embedded in circadian probably. But as people, I'm waiting for that inspiration. You know, I want to see it, but I want to see it for everybody. So, and I'm believing, absolutely believing we will achieve that. I think always the pendulum swings. And so better for us to keep an eye on the things that do unite us, keep talking about those things, express your concerns, go right ahead. You have an obligation to do that. But, you know, change happens. It always happens.
One way or the other.
One way or the other. Now, today we decided that we were going to talk about the color red.
Yes, and things that are associated with it, both bad and good.
All right.
That is a segue from politics too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Well, let's be fair. You know, blue is considered a spiritual color, because if you think about blue sky.
Is it blue? Is that right? I thought it was
blue,
like purple or something. No, that's regal, isn't it?
Yep.
Anyway, we should
so
compete
just to
with other
mention
colors
about
just
blue,
yet. Yeah.
Just blue, spiritual color. Think about the sky. Think about blue water. It's a cool color, cool temperature. If you paint a room blue, it tends to feel chillier in a room like that. Up north, you really have to consider that if you're painting a room like a real icy color, because in a long winter, that room, even though the temperature may say a certain number, a pleasing number, it may still feel cool and drafty, but it's a psychological thing.
Yes, but at the same time, it is kind of irritating to the eye, some blue frequencies.
Yes.
That's why you have to filter out the blue sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Don't they have blue blocker
They
glasses?
do, yeah. And also for screens, for your computer screens and stuff, you're going to filter that out. So yeah, it's weird. Anyway, we're not talking about any other color right now.
Probably in moderation, none of those things would be concerning, but we all tend to spend way too much time on screens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yellow, let's go to yellow. Yellow.
But it's red day.
I'm getting there.
All right.
A dull yellow indicates sickness, like jaundice, and jealousy, you know. And green has jealousy tinged, the green-eyed monster. So those two colors can be jealous. And yellow, a bright, light, cheerful yellow, reminds us of the sun. It is indicative of joy, of happiness, of fertility, of things being in a good place. You know, think about yourself lying on a sunny beach. You know, you've got the beautiful blue of the sea and the sky and the yellow sunlight And that's a happy place to be. So that combination just calls up all of these images of peace and relaxation and reward to a high degree. And purple, as you say, is regal. One of the reasons for that is because the dyes to make purple were extracted from shells and from certain plants, and it was expensive to produce and therefore reserved for royalty usually, or high nobility. And so if you were wearing the purple, that was a little phrase they used, you were wearing the purple, it meant that you had very high status indeed. Green, fertility. We've already mentioned the green-eyed monster, so there's a tinge in there of jealousy. Also decay, like decomposition, because green calls to mind the growing cycles, which, of course, spring, this time of year, the little green seedlings coming up, and that's always a joyful sign.
I think
after
you're thinking
a
of mold.
cold winter. Molds too. Mold,
So why
living.
did we choose red then today?
Well, why did we choose red today?
We noticed a funny little thing when we were sitting last evening in the screen room with a red light, and all of a sudden, well, you're the one that draws fire usually from the mosquitoes.
Oh, I do. They love me.
Yeah.
Biting insects just love me. That's, it should be a nice thing to know that you are so desirable. But when you come, I wind up looking like a pizza half the time because they just bite me unmercifully.
It works out well for
And
me,
I
though.
quit wearing perfumes and things like that if I know I'm going to be outside, because I was worried that maybe I was, attracting them in some way.
Oh, you do. I think that's true.
But it's my personality.
But like I say, it works out well for me. I just sort of live in your shadow
in
many ways.
He sits near me. I'm eaten alive, and he smiles, and he's quick to point out that he's not getting bitten while I'm being feasted upon. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about that. I'm thinking I'm not pleased.
Yeah.
But-
Well, I do get it once in a while from overload. There are just so many that they have to spread out their sphere a little bit and find me. But generally, you're good cover.
It is. Last year for my birthday, this sounds very crazy, but I was grateful. He bought me one of those hats with the net. It looks like almost like a beekeeper's hat, but not that big. Sort of a hiking Aussie-looking hat with a mesh that you can pull down.
Yeah.
And so now I could sit outside in the evening with other people who
Your
don't
bug
get
hat, yeah.
who don't get eaten up. So
But anyway, you noticed yourself
I
that you
did.
didn't notice any issue. I know the screen, it's a screen room. They're not supposed to be able to get in, but somehow, a bunch of them find a way.
I think it's because I prop that door open, moving in and out, taking garbage bags out to the bins and things like that. And so it could be, and that's after supper, after we clean up, I take those bins, the garbage bags right away, right to the bin. And I prop the door open. And then when I get back, I close it. But I'm going to have to stop, set the bags down and shut the door, because now that the weather's getting warmer, the bug populations are bad. Plus, here in Florida, there's a lot of little swampy areas around, and I think that kind of is breeding grounds for some of that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But anyway, we got thinking about why that was. And I thought, well, I remember that the red light does not attract the flying insects. So that was basically the reason for that, we thought. And it's nice when you notice stuff like that afterwards, and then you can put some logic to it and say, oh, that could be then, could actually be. And from what I remember, the reason is because the flying insects and mosquitoes and all them, they can't actually see that light.
Is that right?
They're attracted toward other colors of light, but red is not in their ability to even see, so they don't come toward it, obviously.
Well, I put on the bug repellents. Usually last night I didn't. Last night I was sweeping up and doing other things after supper, and all of a sudden I realized it was later than I thought it was. And I realized I had none of the bug repellent on, And I was not being bitten when those red lights came on. However, well, maybe not. However, it seemed warmer to me because of the red light. You know, I like amber lights because
psychologically.
it kind of makes you think of candlelight or firelight or something like that. But the red light, for some reason,
It did sort of feel relaxing also, I noticed. I think that was just sort of a psychological, mental thing or not, but it did seem very relaxing.
Well, those, they have those red light therapies now.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
They say that it helps the body produce melatonin, and I did sleep well last night, and I was not all bitten up, which maybe that's why I was sleeping better. But they say that it helps the body produce melatonin, that it also is great for hair growth. So in our age group, we could all use a little boost.
I actually had a conversation not that long ago about that with somebody who knows a lot about that sort of thing. And there's a lot of benefit, apparently. There's a lot of stuff out there, and that's why we're sort of categorizing this as a bit freaky or weird, but in a good way, that there are therapies that have been proven to be effective, even though they sound like when you hear them described about what their claims are, what they are able to do or not do. It seems like, that's another one of those things that the people are, it's all the rage kind of thing, but it probably doesn't work or whatever. But there's enough clinical evidence out there to support the fact that it actually does work. And a lot of people are using it for skin issues, including acne and, get this, wrinkles even. Apparently, it's able to smooth wrinkles out.
Let's get some more of those.
I know.
Let's get some more. We'll put the lamps. I wonder.
Back up the spotlight truck.
The light bulbs, your red light bulbs that you put out there, we just put them up. There's light sockets up in the ceiling fan. It's not a terribly, 9-foot ceiling, something like that.
Yeah. And
maybe a little taller. And we had 2 red light bulbs. I did sleep well. But I'm thinking that, if it does help the body produce melatonin relaxes you. Some hair loss is made worse or caused by stress. So if it helps reduce stress, which we know melatonin does, then it would seem like any hair loss that was made worse by stress would be helped. So, I mean, if you follow the
I think there's that too, but primarily the frequency, of course, everything is frequency, and every color, there really is no such thing as color. Our brain connects a color image with certain frequencies that it detects. And red is in the, 600 nanometer wavelength range, something like that. And near infrared, that means it's red crosses over from something that the human eye can see to invisible. And there's that sort of that magic line between those two that has some benefit to the human body. So essentially what they're doing is irradiating you, really, if you have this treatment. And we were irradiating ourselves last night with the red light.
Pretty diluted, though.
Yeah, because it was LED bulbs, and they were equivalent 60 watts or whatever. But
if you have those therapies, do you have to wear glasses or goggles or something?
No, it doesn't harm the eyes. In fact, I'm sure most people know that it does not ruin your night vision. So you can be in a room with a red light or whatever and go right out into the pitch black night, and your eyes don't need to readjust.
What were you telling me about pirates with a patch over their eye?
Yeah, that's the problem with if you're out in the bright daylight, and then they would have to go down below deck or whatever. And there, of course, there's that time for your eyes to adjust. And some people's adjust quicker than others. It depends on, the person, I should say. Maybe their personality, who knows. So what they would do with the patch was that when they were going to descend into the dark area from the deck, they would just pull up the eye patch, and then that eye would already be adjusted to the dark.
So then close the other eye.
Yeah.
Close your above deck eye. Now, see, I always believed that it was because of the sword fighting. I thought, you know what, they're
Could be
aiming
that
for each
too.
other's eyes, but when you see any image of a pirate, what we think of as a classic pirate,
Yeah, they all have to have an eye patch. Yeah.
they have to have an eye patch. And there's a certain mystique with all of that. So, but interesting anyway. I was wondering that.
So
when
anyway.
they do the therapies, how close to the bulbs?
It depends, and that's something that they haven't quite worked out yet, even in the trials. Some of the trials they've done with, actually, I believe, with old-fashioned sort of fluorescent light technology, and basically it's a tube with a gas in it, and then you apply a little bit of electricity to get it going, and the gas will glow one color or the other depending on what gas you have in there. And I think a lot of the trials were done with those kind of sources of the light. I don't think they have a whole lot of data on LED and how much energy you would need to produce from an LED light and that sort of thing. But it is true that if your eye, and you don't have colorblind issues, if your eye detects a deep red color, then it will be in that range somewhere, because that's our eyes are the antennas that receive those radio waves, if you want to think about it that way. And so really what's happening is you say, oh, light, what's that going to do? But when you remember that is an actual energy of frequency, just like a radio signal or a TV signal going through the air, then it does affect us, because according to physics, everything that is material, including ourselves, is also basically just a frequency, a wavelength, a waveform, if you will. So the idea there is that one form of electromagnetic energy will affect another form of electromagnetic energy, just like a magnet will affect each other. And there are north and south poles. Everybody's really familiar with that. And you can't see any of that, but you can certainly feel it when you put the opposing poles together, or attempt to. The similar poles together. They will resist each other. So there's a strong electromagnetic force action happening there. It does indeed affect one form of matter will affect another, because it's all fundamentally electromagnetic waves. This is the freaky part for today. And you try to wrap your head around that, and it's kind of mind-blowing. For me, it's very attractive to think about things like that, but at the same time, it's thinking, oh my gosh, I can't really wrap my head around this. But
It is. That's crazy.
And with that, because we are, let's say, all of us, all matter is a complex electromagnetic waveform, basically, if you think about it. And it will have its own resonant frequency.
Is there a
combination of
baseline,
waves.
like among people, is there a wide variable of frequency emanation from a person? Is that what they used to talk about auras?
Yeah, it would be connected in some way, definitely. But matter, there is a formula. One of the classic physicists, and his name will come to me here. Give me a second. Anyway, it'll pop into my head.
Yeah.
But there's a formula to figure out, based on the mass of something, what its resonant frequency is, or would be in theory. And this is another very fascinating thing that is part of current research in the medical field, about how you can affect certain kinds of matter in a good way to heal things by using electromagnetic energy only.
I'm loving that. It's
Instead
so
of-
much less invasive. And I mean, so much less scary than certainly surgeries, which are unavoidable in so many cases. But also like radiation therapy and things like that. And I know that's a wave therapy too, isn't it?
It is.
But it can be destructive as
they,
well as...
They don't, yeah, the old method, and they're still using it, sadly, it has horrible side effects for some people, even though it might have saved their life. People with cancer, it messes them up so badly because they don't really have a good way of controlling where that electromagnetic energy goes. They can point it as best they can at the cancer, for instance, but they cannot shield completely surrounding tissues, and they get destroyed just as well. There's no discrimination from that kind of treatment. But there are the exciting newer treatments called proton therapy, where they're actually bombarding the cancers with hydrogen protons, and they can precisely dial in how far they penetrate. For instance, they can't go beyond where they dial in the proton to stop. It stops.
I'm just loving all of this new science. I think it's spectacularly interesting.
But the very recent ones related to what we're talking about right now is electromagnetic radio waves of much lower energy than the normal radiation therapy that everybody's heard about. It is basically frequency dependent and not so much energy dependent. How much power, how many watts you use has been on the very high side with the traditional radiation therapy.
So let me clarify the difference
the
between
amplitude.
Frequency and the power. Frequency, is that more of a pulsing thing if you're talking about how many
cycles per second?
How close together those cycles per second are.
Exactly. It's a higher frequency. It's inversely proportional frequency and wavelength. So instead of saying, okay, let's bombard this cancer with high levels of RF energy, and it's like a microwave. You don't put your hand in a microwave because it's a very powerful amount of energy in there, but it's indiscriminate to the frequency. But so the better solution now that is being used, and at least in trials to see how it can be applied, is frequency dependent, not so much on how much power it is, but what the frequency is. Because again, all matter has a resonant frequency, even a cancer cell. And that will have a different resonant frequency than a normal healthy cell will. And if it doesn't have enough of a different frequency, they're doing cool things like actually injecting, I'll say injecting, but there are other methods of doing that because cells are pretty small. You don't have a needle to inject a single cell, for instance, but they are putting material in those cells, like, I'll call it like a dye. People are familiar with when you contrast dye for X-rays and things like that. Similar thing. And that dye has a resonant frequency of its own. And then they'll put that frequency toward the cancer cells that you have now impregnated, so to speak, with this dye. Then it destroys the dye, which in turn, because it's part of that cell, destroys the cell also, but leaves the healthy tissue around it completely untouched.
So just where they're pinpointing where they're injecting this, what you're calling a dye.
In some cases, it is a dye, and that brings us back to red, because some of those dyes are indeed red.
Oh.
So you can hit that with, the frequency, some frequency in the red range, or maybe an opposite one, that will actually start the whole thing vibrating. Anything that's out of sync like that, for instance, when your car engine starts to, vibrate, that there's something that's not tuned up right. It's not tuned up. And what happens there is everything starts to heat up and eventually your engine will die. So that's kind of what happens. You're using that principle on purpose to harm things that need to be harmed, like cancer cells.
So you're injecting an arrhythmia.
Basically, yeah.
Wow.
So it's really amazing and
I am
really amazing
so
stuff.
Absolutely astounded by all the new methods that they're talking about. All of these potential cures or delay tactics for Alzheimer's. This morning I read that they have been able to map a mouse's brain. They had the mouse. This sounds crazy. This sounds like something that probably would get cut because they were having mice watch YouTube and other
Oh,
videos.
that's so cruel.
They had them watch. No, we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
This podcast is on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I love watching YouTube, and that I'm not even just saying.
Well, like 5% of it, maybe.
Anyway, no, that's the beauty of the thing. Find what you like. They had the mice watching YouTube, and they were operating with like a single cell or a little cut, a little sample that they had taken from the mouse's brain, or they were working with. The size of, they said, like 1 grain of sand is what the sample was. And it must have been intact still, but that's what they were reading. And they said that they could see how the neurons were in the pathways were firing. So they were able to then, using AI, map the whole brain, the traffic patterns of the brain from my interpretation of what I read. And that by so doing, they're beginning to make better assessments of how things are connected. This vast interconnected superhighway map, and they said that this will help them understand so much better areas that they can focus treatments on for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other autoimmune diseases connected with neurology.
Yes, and there's other studies too along those same, like poor mice, but they're helping out in some way.
Yeah.
With just audible frequencies and vibrations too, seem to have. So the very low frequencies that are in your brain waves are extremely low. Some audible frequencies, they're that low that you can hear them as a low bass note.
Like brown noise, what they call brown noise?
Yeah, exactly.
Which isn't that the sound, the real low frequencies that they say that in the womb you hear what is essentially brown noise because it's very low frequency.
Yes, brown, and it's also, they call it brown because it's like Brownian motion, that the atoms that are kind of constantly in motion, if you could hear that sound, it would be something like brown noise. But pink noise too, and that basically the difference between pink noise and brown noise and white noise is the fact that it includes more of the broader range of frequencies that the human ear can detect. Like the lower frequencies are added in pink noise and brown noise, for instance. And a lot of research along those lines too. Some people with certain disorders, sleep disorders and other things.
And autism.
And also some dementias. If you listen to pink noise, some kind, you have those noise generators you can put beside your bed or whatever, and they're finding a lot of benefit from just having that sound in the room. Some people I know will run a fan or something for white noise, but the white noise is not good for you. They found
it's static, essentially.
It has to be that you have to have that lower frequency in there. Seems to be the magic, and those lower frequencies are indeed the ones in their range with the brain waves. But there's a lot we can get into that too. It's just fascinating stuff, and we call it freaky. Like, oh, this this can't be true.
It's freaky
this
because
is
we're
pseudoscience, but it's not pseudoscience anymore.
Speaking of old science and pharmaceuticals and things like that, I understand that there will be tariffs on pharmaceuticals that come in from China. So that we're looking for things to reduce those prices. This might not be that. So I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
But with all of these new technologies, they seem much more in tune with how the body functions just normally. You know what I mean? How the body is designed to function.
That's right. And now that you mentioned pharmaceuticals, they're not entirely happy about this trend.
Oh, I'm sure they'll figure out a way to get in there.
But anyway, the red light therapy thing, which you started talking about, is it seems like it's some sort of charlatan thing, but apparently again it's helping smooth out wrinkles. It's helping acne. And it really, the science behind that, as I know it, and again, I'm not a super expert, but I do read a lot, and I have been to medical school for a while. Is that it is apparently stimulating the mitochondria that exist in every cell we have, to produce the hormone that will rebuild, and also to resist things like what they call oxidative stress, which is just basically happens from normal living, because obviously we're surrounded with oxygen, and oxygen, we wouldn't be here without it, but if too much of it, and then that's also
Too much of
bad.
a good thing.
Yeah. So the balance is important, the percentage is important, but it's really quite fascinating. So we'll be getting more red lights, I think.
I think so too. I saw a contraption that you fit your toes in for people that are plagued with like toe fungus and things like that. You clamp it over the top of your foot somehow, and then you turn on the little red light, leave it on there for a duration, and they're using that to address problems with persistent infections from fungus.
Is it red? Are you sure? Because sometimes they use a blue sort of frequency
it's
for
red.
that sort of thing. If it's some sort of organism to be killed, like a fungus or something, usually, but maybe it could be.
I'm wondering if all of this research won't make hospital settings a lot safer. If at various points, they could bathe, let's say, an operating room or other places that you would need to have a really, really high level of
ultraviolet
sterility.
The UV is the one that does that, and that's why it's you can sanitize things by putting them out in the sun from the UV light.
And they have wands too, don't they? UV wands.
They do, but again,
it's not
just
enough.
because it looks like ultraviolet to your eye doesn't necessarily mean that it's exactly the right frequency or the right power and that sort of thing. So that needs to be vetted and tested and that sort of thing too, to make sure that it really is something that's beneficial or not.
I'm hoping that RFK Jr. kind of really encourages that sort of thing, because he seems to want to remove like a lot of artificial stuff.
I was just thinking last evening too that the irony of the fact that with this red light therapy being a real thing, and that's a good thing, but most people in their perception, the color red is associated with something bad. How about the red light district, for instance?
You know what I read about that?
Why did you read about the red light district?
I was looking up red.
What did you do before I met you?
Ooh, wouldn't you like to know?
Yes, I would, actually. No, maybe not.
Now that you bring it up, no, you don't. That coal miners used to take their red coal mining lamps over to the brothel district so that anybody, if they were needed for something, people would know they were there, but not who. So I'm thinking, if you're a coal miner, you don't have a bunch of money to be spending over there. So I'm having a hard time believing that, and it hasn't been vetted completely, that idea. But red is the color of passion. We know that, for good or for evil. So if you see like big splashes of red or something, it suggests anger. It suggests carnality, because it's associated with blood. It's also
a warning, though, because it seems like the workers in the red light district would say, a red light is like, traffic light. Stop.
Yeah,
stay away. But that obviously can't be the message there.
No, in the red light district, it probably means stop leaving, stop on your path and stay here for a while. I don't know, but you know what? We're almost out of time.
Really?
Yeah,
we have more to talk about red.
I know. How can, when we say
red
that.
Sky at night, is that good or bad?
Good.
Yeah, see, there you go.
Red sky
red sky in morning is bad.
Sailors take warning.
It's both good and bad, but it's got more good associated with it than I thought.
Yeah, it's certainly. But I love all of these therapies, and I think it does us good to focus.
And again, if it sounds interesting,
something.
anything you hear that sounds interesting, or what we're talking about, go search it up for yourself. In this case, you could say red light therapy.
Yes.
And NIH, which is the government website on all of this stuff, and very credible, of course.
Yes. I do think it's very important, no matter where you get your information, double check it yourself. It's easy to do if you have the phones, and all of that. A little harder to do if you have to trek yourself to the library for any of that, but it's worth the trip.
And we will have some guests on in the future about some of this stuff. It's really, really interesting.
Anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. This is a Friday, of course, so you've got the weekend to look forward to.
You got the weekend off from us.
Yeah, they do. You do. Have fun and count your blessings.
Bye.